Marvin Gaye was Motown's golden child, the smooth voice behind some of the label's biggest hits. But behind the success, something was wrong. By 1983, just 2 years before his tragic death, Marvin had walked away from Motown, the company that made him a star. But why? From Motown tampering with his music,
his sweat and his tears, and I don't feel people should tamper with an artist's work. In music, they feel, disc jockeys and music people feel awfully free with editing and splicing and changing things about, and it drives me crazy. In fact, it's the reason why I left Motown.
To fostering a toxic environment for its artists.
Because of the environment, if I had my way, I'd just sort of like to rewrite the script a little bit so that I could be a bit happier.
Marvin had seen the dark side of the label firsthand. And when asked in a 1983 interview if he looked back at his Motown days as the good old days, his response was anything but nostalgic.
Look upon the Motown days as the good old days.
No.
No.
But then, as if catching himself, he quickly reshaped his response.
I look upon the Motown days as one of the experiences in my life that I wouldn't give $1 million for. And I look upon the Motown days as unique experience and experience that I would pay probably $1 million to have again.
A contradiction. He loved it, yet he didn't love it. He was grateful, yet something about it bothered him. He reminisced about the early 60s, calling Motown a loving family. But even that statement took a strange turn.
Close, very lovable, very loving, which causes me to wonder about it sometimes. But
Marvin didn't clarify, but his hesitation suggested that there was more to the story. Still, he praised Berry Gordy, calling him a great man who managed to survive in such an awful, competitive field of music.
Proud of Berry Gordy Jr., who is a black man who has managed to survive in such a competitive field of music. I have great respect for him.
He even admitted that being part of the Motown family helped him maintain a good relationship with Berry. But then, almost as an afterthought, he threw in something deeply personal.
Worse, I guess you can imagine, when I was younger. Probably totally uncontrollable.
The way Marvin described himself sounded like a man battling contradictions. But his real struggles with Motown weren't about personality. They were about control. He had built his career inside Motown, but he didn't own his art. And that, above all, was something he could never accept. When asked if his recent comeback with healing felt like a new chapter in his life, Marvin hesitated before answering.
In a great sense, I have had a measure of revenge in certain aspects, and those who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about.
Marvin didn't elaborate, but when the interviewer pressed him, his response was chilling.
I go into that because it's rather personal, but I'm sure those who are listening to this know exactly what I mean, and we'll leave it at that.
Who was he talking about? Berry Gordy? Motown? The system that controlled him for years? We may never know, but whatever Marvin had been through, he hadn't forgotten it. And his frustration didn't just stop at business dealings. It extended to the very music he created. He hated the way Motown tampered with his work.
Discrimination, but there is tampering with one's art, which drives me berserk.
For Marvin, music wasn't just business, it was everything. And Motown had violated it. And then, he dropped the real reason he left Motown.
Disc jockeys and music people feel awfully free with editing and splicing and changing things about, and it drives me crazy. In fact, it's the reason why I left Motown and why I asked Berry Gordy to release me.
Marvin wasn't just unhappy. He felt betrayed. He was an artist, and yet he had no say over his own art. But even after leaving Motown, Marvin wasn't truly free. He admitted that despite his success, he still had thoughts of revenge.
I don't want to feel human and normal. I just want to be an artist. I hate those human normal feelings. I like the feelings I have as an artist when I'm out in the woods in the rain or sitting by myself in the sun and having God shine on me. I like that calling.
But as much as he wanted to rise above it all, he couldn't deny the satisfaction he felt seeing himself back on top. And then came one last confession, one that gave us a glimpse into just how deep his resentment ran. He recalled sitting at the Grammys year after year, hoping to win, only to lose repeatedly to Lou Rawls. He even joked about tackling Rawls on stage. But then, when he finally won an award, his first ever award at the American Music Awards, he had a speech prepared. A speech that would have been his ultimate payback.
His marvelous acceptance speech already to say these nice things cleverly and get back at those that I thought needed a few words of encouragement.
Even at his peak, Marvin Gaye was still battling his inner struggles. And this was just one of many times he opened up about Motown. In a separate interview, he revealed even more about his mindset, his frustrations, and his complicated feelings toward fame, Motown, and his own image. Marvin Gaye had a fighting spirit. It was something people noticed about him. His resilience, his ability to push through the darkest moments of his life and career. When asked how he managed to maintain it for so long, his response was both philosophical and deeply introspective.
It's an interesting question. I guess it's my Aries blood, I guess. The ego, perhaps. I think that I was born for this business.
But then, as he often did, Marvin immediately contradicted himself. Despite believing he was meant for music, he confessed that he had never been fully comfortable with the role he was given.
I think in spite of my reluctance to perhaps perform or become a regular performing artist.
Was Marvin Gaye trying to say that he wasn't just an entertainer, but something more? His music had long carried political, spiritual, and emotional weight. But this was one of the rare moments he seemed to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, he had been placed in this world for a higher reason. However, Motown had made Marvin Gaye a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. Songs like Let's Get It On and Healing cemented his reputation, but when asked about it, his response was unsettling.
I'm not crazy about my image, if that is what you're asking. I can't deal with that psychologically.
It wasn't Marvin's plan to become the face of seduction. It was marketed that way. And deep down, he didn't even agree with it.
I came out of a situation with Motown. I had to, we re-signed with CBS, and they were interested in commercial product.
He had been forced into playing a role that didn't align with his true self. And that tension, the conflict between art and commerce, was something he struggled with for his entire career. You see, Marvin Gaye was never driven by money. He knew it was a necessary part of the business, but to him, it wasn't the point.
If you're a true artist, if you're true to your art, you'll have money. If you're a good artist, money will come.
And then he made a brutally honest observation about the real priorities in the industry.
Talent isn't in this business. It comes way down with this. It starts with personality, brains, and tells all that stuff is way before talent.
For Marvin, this was the problem with the music industry. True artistry was rarely rewarded. What mattered most was how well an artist could be marketed, how they could be shaped into a profitable image, whether they liked it or not. And maybe that's why Marvin spent so much time in seclusion. Marvin Gaye had everything: fame, talent, a legendary career. But the deeper he got into the industry, the more he pulled away.
I'm rather fond of my seclusion, and I can get into some artistic stuff.
He preferred being alone. He needed to escape the noise, the expectations, the business of it all, because only in those moments of solitude could he find the inspiration to create. That was always his goal, to create music that lived beyond him. Coming off the revelations about his aversion to his own image and the struggles that came with fame, Marvin Gaye went even deeper in another interview, explaining why he had to leave the US and spend years in Europe before healing. And in a shocking twist, it all tied back to Motown. In what was his first television interview after resurfacing, Marvin Gaye laid bare the truth about his retreat from the music scene.
I was in bankruptcy. The second problem at the same time was I was undergoing 2 divorces during the same, and that's a bit of pressure.
At a time when the world assumed he was simply taking a break, Marvin revealed that his departure was actually a strategic retreat. He compared it to a general knowing when to fall back in battle. But while financial struggles and personal heartbreak contributed to his exile, there was an even bigger force that played a role: Motown itself. For years, Marvin had been one of Motown's biggest stars, recording timeless hits like Hitchhike, How Sweet It Is, To Be Loved by You, and I Heard It Through the Grapevine. But behind the scenes, his relationship with the label was far from smooth. Disagreements with Motown's leadership, particularly Berry Gordy, had begun to weigh on him. The situation escalated to the point where he felt the only way to regain control of his artistry was to walk away entirely. When asked directly about his conflicts with Motown, Marvin took a diplomatic stance at first.
I've had difficulties with Motown, but I'm not sure it was their fault. I'm a difficult person. I admit that.
But then, when pressed on whether he deliberately made himself more difficult so the label would finally let him go, he hesitated.
Did you try to make yourself a little bit more difficult so they would let you go?
Now, Boyd, that's rather incriminating in a way, but perhaps.
The interviewer then asked if there would be lawsuits against Motown for unpaid royalties. Marvin carefully avoided confirming anything outright, but his response left little room for doubt.
Are there going to be lawsuits on your part against Motown?
No, not at this. Lawsuits. Normal audits and things like that.
When the interviewer pushed further, asking if he felt he had been underpaid, Marvin smirked before responding.
Deserve.
Now, Boyd, I never said that. And
would you say it?
Would I? Yes, I would.
Marvin then admitted that leaving Motown gave him a new sense of artistic freedom, and though he was careful not to phrase it in a way that would sound too condemning, his words were telling.
If I say yes, that would mean I felt locked up or somehow imprisoned or in bondage or something like that.
And just like that, the truth was out. Marvin Gaye, a man who had defined an era of Motown, had come to feel suffocated by the very label that made him famous. In the end, Motown didn't let Marvin go voluntarily. It took a staggering $2 million buyout from Columbia Records to finally sever the contract and free him. And the gamble paid off. Despite his absence from the industry, Sexual Healing was an instant success, selling over 1 million copies in just 2 weeks. But for Marvin, the money wasn't the point. After everything he had been through, he was finally at a place where he could define his own purpose. In any case, Marvin wasn't the only one who felt trapped by Motown's contracts. For Florence Ballard, Motown wasn't just a record label. It was a battlefield. A place where talent didn't guarantee success, and loyalty didn't guarantee protection. She saw firsthand how Berry Gordy played favorites, how he raked in millions while paying his artists crumbs, and most of all, how he let Diana Ross walk all over her. And it wasn't paranoia. It was a system carefully designed to push her out. Even before her final days in the Supremes, Florence felt the pressure closing in.
It seemed like I was always under pressure from Berry.
It was a conversation in Canada that confirmed her worst fears.
I remember we were in Canada, getting ready to catch a flight to Vancouver.
Florence had never stood in Diana's way, but what she hadn't agreed to was leaving the group herself.
But by the same token, I didn't say that I would leave the group either.
Berry didn't care. The decision had already been made. What Florence didn't know was that a backup plan had been in motion for over a year. When the Supremes arrived at the Copacabana, she saw Cindy Birdsong, an outsider suddenly positioned within their inner circle.
They had Cindy Birdsong was there, and they had been grooming her with tapes for a whole year, and I didn't even have any knowledge of it.
Florence was still officially in the group, but the signs were all there. The pressure, the isolation, the feeling that her every move was being watched. And then came the ultimate betrayal. The Supremes always traveled to their performances together. A limousine would pick them up from the hotel and take them to the venue. But that night, something was different.
Instead of me getting in the limousine, Cindy Birdsong was asked to get in the limousine. So I rode on to the Copa in Lincoln that Tommy was driving.
Cindy was there to study her, to watch her performance, to prepare to take her place. Florence wasn't just being pushed out, she was being erased. After the Copa, the Supremes went on to perform at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. Florence still held on, still fought to remain part of the group she helped create. But by this point, Berry Gordy had made up his mind.
Barry felt, well, I guess he knew how to get to me because he wanted, which he always said, he wanted to control me, and if he couldn't control me, then he didn't want me around.
That night, Florence had a few drinks before going on stage. It wasn't unusual.
I had me a few drinks, and that's not unusual. Mary, Diane, all of us had drinks before we went on stage.
But for Barry, this was the final excuse he needed. Motown didn't just remove Florence, they discredited her. Berry Gordy began attacking her publicly, using her weight and drinking habits against her.
Florence, you're too fat. Florence, you drink too much. In other words, I guess I was supposed to say I'm an alcoholic.
She was a size 12, far from overweight. But standing next to Diana, Berry made her feel like she didn't belong. But Motown had its narrative. Florence wasn't pushed out. She had fallen apart. She was difficult. She was a problem. She was a woman who had let herself go. It didn't matter that they all drank. It didn't matter that she had built the Supremes from the ground up. Barry had made his decision, and Florence Ballard was no longer useful to him. Years later, Florence would reflect on what happened. The manipulation, the betrayal, the years of work that were taken from her overnight, and she knew exactly why it had happened.
He always said he wanted to control me, and if he couldn't control me, then he didn't want me around.
Florence's downfall showed how ruthless the industry could be, but she wasn't the only Motown artist who struggled behind the scenes. Tammi Terrell's tragic story was even more heartbreaking. Before her career even took off, Tammi found herself trapped in a dangerous relationship with James Brown. She was just 17, he was nearly 30, a star so big that no one dared to challenge him. But behind closed doors, things were different.
She had told me that James used to hit her regularly, in the head, among other places.
Tammi suffered physical abuse at his hands. Some reports even claim that Brown once beat her so badly that she needed stitches. Eventually, she escaped. But the trauma didn't disappear. And just a few years later, she walked into another nightmare. David Ruffin was the face of the Temptations, charismatic, talented, and adored by fans. At first, Tammi thought she'd finally found real love. They were Motown's power couple, the golden duo. But soon, the cracks started to show. David was cheating, and when Tammi found out, things turned violent.
A vein under her eye that would stand out. They gave her glasses, but nobody thought to x-ray her head or anything.
Some say Ruffin even hit her in the head with a motorcycle helmet. Whether that attack contributed to her later health struggles is still debated. But one thing was certain. Tammi was already in trouble. For years, Tammi suffered from migraines, but no one realized how serious they were. Then, in 1967, everything came crashing down. She was performing with Marvin Gaye when she suddenly collapsed in his arms. Fans had no idea what was happening, but Tammi was in excruciating pain. Doctors later diagnosed her with a brain tumor. But instead of letting her rest, Motown kept pushing her to work. She underwent 8 brain surgeries, but the industry didn't stop.
if I had Tammy, you're dying, you're gonna die, I think she would have died right then and there.
By 1970, Tammi was confined to a wheelchair, and weeks before her 25th birthday, she was gone. Despite being one of Motown's biggest female stars, the label barely acknowledged her death. No one from Motown showed up at her funeral, not even Berry Gordy. And Tammy's mother didn't want them around either.
She said, well, I don't want him in the funeral. I said, you what? She said, I don't want him in the funeral.
Marvin Gaye was devastated. Her death pushed him into a deep depression, and he even considered leaving music altogether.
Tammy's death set Marvin on a track of drugs that escalated beyond his control.
But instead, he channeled his grief into something that would change music forever. What's Going On, his masterpiece, was born from that pain. In any case, Marvin Gaye was always a man of contradictions. A preacher's son who made sensual music. A Motown superstar who constantly fought against the label's control. A man searching for peace while battling inner demons. His early career was a dream come true. Signed to Motown in the early 60s, he quickly became one of the label's biggest stars, known for his smooth voice and romantic ballads. Hits like Ain't That Peculiar and How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You made him a household name.
How sweet it is to be loved by you.
But Marvin wanted more than just love songs. Behind the scenes, he was restless. He wanted to make music that mattered, music that spoke to the soul. Tammi Terrell's death pushed him over the edge. He disappeared from the spotlight. He questioned everything. He battled depression, drug use, and an overwhelming sense of guilt. Some say he blamed himself for not doing more to save Tammi. For 2 years, Marvin barely made music. Then, in 1971, he returned with an album that would redefine his career. What's Going On wasn't just an album. It was a revolution. Inspired by the chaos of the world, war, poverty, racism, it was raw, emotional, and deeply personal.
My brother was at war, and I prayed a lot that he would come through safely, and it was a very trying period for me at Motown.
Berry Gordy didn't want to release the album. He thought it was too political, too risky. Marvin refused to back down. The album was a masterpiece. It became his greatest success and proved that Motown could be more than just love songs. But even with all his success, Marvin still couldn't escape his demons. His life was a constant battle. Failed marriages, financial troubles, addiction. By the early 80s, he was at his lowest point. Broke, struggling with drug addiction, and seeking refuge in Belgium, far away from the chaos of his life. Then, he made one last comeback. Spiritual healing brought him back to the top. It won him his first ever Grammy. For a moment, it seemed like he had finally found peace. But his greatest tragedy was yet to come. On April 1st, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, Marvin was shot and killed by his own father. The world lost a legend. But even in death, Marvin Gaye's music lived on. From What's Going On to Let's Get It On, his songs remain timeless. Reminders of a genius who gave the world everything he had, even when it cost him everything.